My name is Chris Yee, and I'm making a 3D puzzle platformer called Nectar. In the game, you play as a potted sunflower with its bumblebee companion, using nectar to grow plants, solve puzzles, and manipulate the world. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I completely changed how my core mechanic works in the game. And by core mechanic, of course I'm talking about the nectar. This may come as a surprise, but the nectar is one of the first things I added in the game. It was very early in development, and I had very little experience with blueprints and any type of coding at all. It was very sloppy the way I set it up, and things were just not set up in the best way. So for the past few months, I knew I would eventually have to change the way that I have it set up. So how did the old system work, and what was wrong with it? I briefly went over how it worked in one of my early devlogs. I believe it was devlog number 3. But that was just a very brief overview. I want to go a little more into detail here so you can understand what I changed and why I changed it. So how did the old system work? There were two parts to it. The first part was the more functional part. I need a way to grow and shrink certain plants to solve puzzles. That's like not including the grass or leaves or anything. They're actually the functional plants that you use to platform and solve puzzles. This was easy enough to achieve. I just used a collision sphere that would grow and shrink around the nectar to activate plants. And I used overlap events with these collision spheres, so whenever the collision sphere overlapped a plant, I could scale the plant accordingly. And I placed these collision spheres in every single nectar actor as well as in the player character to grow nectar around the player. So this worked for the functionality of the nectar, but it was hard to tell what was actually happening visually. The player can't see the collision spheres, so you can't really see why things are growing and shrinking. They randomly grow and shrink. I needed a visual way for the player to be able to tell what was going on. So the visual part of the nectar focuses on revealing and hiding the grass within a sphere around the nectar. It also changes the color of things around the nectar. For this, I used a sphere mask. So everything inside the sphere behaves one way, everything outside the sphere behaves a different way. And I use this to control the transparency and color of certain materials. I also used it to cell shade everything inside the nectar radius, and I used it to create an outline around the nectar to make the boundaries more obvious. Now for the sphere mask to work, I need two pieces of information: the location of the sphere and the radius of the sphere. And the only way to communicate this information from a blueprint to the material, that I'm aware of at least, is by using a material parameter collection. So in each nectar actor, I set the location and the radius of the sphere mask every frame. And this includes all different forms of nectar, so the blobs, the crystals, the nectar pulse from the player, everything. And the way I had it set up, each individual actor would send their own location and radius to the material parameter collection. Now there were some problems with this setup. The biggest one was if all nectar actors store their location and radius to the same spot in the material parameter collection, they would override each other. So if I spawn another nectar actor that does the same thing as the first one, then the second set of data would override the first one. And visually, you'd see the first sphere mask appear, and then when the second one appears, the first one would disappear and just transport over to the second one. So I needed a way to have multiple nectar spheres at the same time. And to solve this, I made a whole bunch of separate sphere masks within the material function. I made the name of the vector in the floats being stored a public variable within the actor, and then I made a bunch of child actors and changed that variable default name to save to a different spot in the material function. And with this system, I could have multiple nectar spheres going at the same time and technically did what I needed it to do. There were some more issues though with this system. It was very difficult to manage, and it would make level design in the future very difficult. The problem was if I used more than one of the same child actor, then I would have the same override issue. So it would override the previous child actor that I had used of that version of the child actor. So I'd have to pay attention to which child actors I was putting into the world and manage them manually and make sure that I didn't have any duplicates. So I wanted to try to fix these in a new system. Now the first thing I did was I separated the collision sphere from the nectar actors. So I made a separate actor just for the collision sphere, and instead of just constantly having a collision sphere present in each nectar actor, I would spawn a collision sphere when I need it and destroy it when I don't need it. So this solved some weird issues that I was having with the nectar activating when I didn't want it to, and it also just made my setup a little simpler. So that was one thing I did. The main thing I wanted to fix though was having multiple child actors of the nectar. I didn't really want to have to do that if I could figure out a different way. It was just too cumbersome to manage. So the way that material parameter collections work, I do need to individually assign numbers each time nectar appears. Materials, for whatever reason, can't read from arrays at the moment, so I will need to assign numbers to them. And if I need to assign numbers to them, I don't necessarily have to assign them manually. I could just have a blueprint assign them. So that's what I did. I made a nectar manager blueprint, and I attached it to my player characters so that it's always around. Now, in my first setup, the material parameters were specific to the type of nectar. So I had one for the nectar blob, one for the nectar crystals, just every single type of nectar. But that was kind of unnecessary. I didn't need them to be specific. I could make them more general. So that's what I did. I made a more general material parameter, and I just put a number after it, and I could continue that number sequentially and just have a whole bunch of general material parameters. Now you can't add material parameters dynamically at runtime, so I needed to make them ahead of time, and I just made 40 generic nectar slots just in case I need them. I've never gotten close to 40, so that should be good enough, but that's where I started with 40 slots. And I can manage these 40 slots with the manager blueprint. So everything is set to the world origin with 0 radius by default. So if that collision sphere actor that I created earlier is spawned, it searches through an array of 40 different booleans. It finds the first unoccupied spot and it sets that spot to true, and then it assigns the nectar to that index. So if there's no other activated nectar around, it assigns it to index 0, for example. But if there are already 5 other spots occupied, then it assigns it to index 6, for example. So now I have a way of assigning a number from 1 to 40 to any nectar without any overlap, which is exactly what I need for my material parameter collection. With numbers assigned, it then looks for all nectar that is activated and stores their locations and radiuses in an array every frame, and then it uses those arrays to update the numbers in the material parameter collection. Now if a collision sphere is destroyed, it unassigns that index and it unchecks the slot in the Boolean array, and it resets the location and radiuses back to 0. Now, unassigning nectar from the array creates gaps in the array, so when it's assigning a nectar to a number, it looks for the first unoccupied one. So for example, if slots 0, 1, 5, and 6 are occupied, it assigns it to index 2. Now, as a little optimization, I want to prevent it from having to update all 40 locations and all 40 radiuses every single frame, even if they aren't activated. Because if they're not activated, I don't need to keep setting an inactive nectar to 0 every single frame. So to limit this, I find the highest index being used and I stop the for loop that I have in my code at that index. So every time I spawn a nectar, I reset the max index. Every time I destroy a nectar, I also reset the max index. And then depending on what that max index is, I'm only updating those indexes every frame. The rest of them are just staying 0. So if I'm only using 6 slots in my array, then the other 34 slots are not getting updated. And I'm pretty happy with how this system has come out. Just as a demonstration of the manager at work, the top left corner displays every time a nectar is assigned or unassigned to an index, and it also displays the max index number that I was using. So it shows how many slots in the array are being updated at any given time. And this new system allows for way more flexibility, so I don't need 40 child actors to create 40 nectar instances. I just need one child actor that I can use, and it'll update automatically for me. And I don't think I'll ever need more than 40 slots, but if I do, it is pretty easy to add more slots. We'll see in the future if I need that. But that's pretty much it. That's my new system, working great, and it will eventually save me a lot more time in the future. If you want to see more about this game as it develops, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to join my community, I have a Discord server. The link to that is in the description. I answer questions and stuff there. If you have questions about Unreal, I'll try to answer them to the best of my abilities. And if you just want to support the game, I have a Steam page. You can go wishlist the game there. That's the best way to support me. Thanks.